All right. Hi, everyone. So this is actually my second time in Krakow. I was here just over 11 years ago. I was sitting in a hotel having breakfast, and 3 people walked into the room. I knew 2 of them. I didn't know the third one. The third one was a woman. They sat down at my table, and we said hello to each other. And then a year later, we were married. And yeah, and you'd be happy to know that we're still married. So I have very good memories of this city. I don't remember what I was eating for breakfast, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the food that I'm going to talk to you about today. And I work for a company called the Good Food Institute. And one of the big problems that we think about is how are we going to feed 10 billion people by 2050, because that's predicted to be what the population of the world is going to be at that point. And we do it through 4 program areas. We're a nonprofit, and you can think of us like a think tank. And our goal, our mission, is to accelerate the amount of research in both plant-based meat and clean meat, and I'll talk about those in a bit. And we do this through 4 program areas. The top one on the left is about innovation. So we assess the industries, we find out where there are opportunities for research and innovation, and then we find scientists in universities and in companies to do that research, and we find money to make it happen as well. We support startups, so any entrepreneur that's interested in creating a startup, closer? There. Any entrepreneur that's interested in creating a startup around plant-based meat or clean meat, we can help you with that. We also have a corporate engagement department that works with all of the big restaurants, grocery stores, food suppliers to get more plant-based foods on menus and on shelves. And then finally, we spend a lot of time educating institutions. So those could be governments, funding bodies, universities, about the promise of this industry and why they should invest people and money in it. So back to that question, that 10 billion people question. These 4 animals here provide the majority of the food or majority of the meat that we consume today on a daily basis. Down at the bottom is the finfish, and the finfish is the most efficient. It converts just 12% of calories in to food out. The chicken, next, as you probably know, has been relentlessly optimized for efficiency, but it's still pretty bad, right? It takes 9 calories of energy in to produce just 1 calorie of food. And the pig, about the same, 10% efficient. And then the cow up at the top requires a massive 100 calories of energy in to produce just 1 calorie of food. That's just a 1% energy conversion rate. So all of these are terrible, right? And it's a food system that doesn't work today, and it's certainly not going to work in 2050 when there's another 3 billion people on the planet. So to feed those 10 billion people, we need a far more sustainable and efficient food system. And our food system isn't just bad, it isn't just inefficient, it's also bad for the planet. It negatively impacts human health through lifestyle diseases, zoonotic diseases, antibiotic resistance. Billions of animals each year are treated cruelly on factory farms, and it has disastrous effects on our environment. Animal agriculture is one of the leading causes for the loss of biodiversity, and it's responsible for up to 91% of Amazon rainforest destruction. So, despite everyone knowing all of these things, or at least a rising awareness and acceptance that factory farming is bad, people continue to eat more meat. Meat production and meat consumption continue to rise. And this isn't just due to the rising population of the world. People in all areas of the world are eating more and more meat. So if continuing to tell people that eating meat is bad for a variety of reasons isn't the solution, what is? So there are many examples of where new technologies and markets have rapidly transformed an established industry. And our food industry is no different. meat made from plants is already changing the way consumers behave, and meat made from cell culture and tissue engineering is poised to do the same and more. And I'll talk about both of those. And so why do we think that this trend is going to continue and transform our food industry? So I'll talk a little bit about some market trends. The first one that's really interesting is to look at plant-based milk as an example of what can happen. So about 5-10 years ago, the plant-based milk market was less than 1%, had a less than 1% share of the total dairy market. And then it grew to now a 10% market share. And this didn't happen because people suddenly started caring about cows and wanted to eat plant-based milk. It happened for 3 reasons. The taste of plant-based milks improved, the price went down, and most importantly, the convenience of those milks changed. So they moved from the dusty corner where the other sort of eco-friendly products were to the refrigerated section. And it's now sold right next to dairy milk. And this exploded this market. And we think the same thing is going to happen with plant-based meat, which at the moment is almost just noise in the whole meat market. So it's like less than 1/4% market share, but it's starting to grow rapidly. And we see the same trend happening. In fact, we see growth in meat substitute demand everywhere. Unfortunately, Poland isn't on this, but I would guess, unless someone knows, that it's up. The growth is very similar to what we see in other European countries like Germany and Austria. So it's growing rapidly all over the world. What's interesting when we look at the different segments of alternatives to either dairy or meat is that the plant-based milk segment there in the middle, that tall bar, the growth is actually slowing. And what we found at least in the US, and I think this is true around the world, is that more than 90% of households that buy plant-based milks still buy dairy milk. So what does that mean? It means that the plant-based milks are not delivering all of the features and qualities that people are used to from dairy milk, right? So it might be they might need it for baking something or some recipe that they really think it needs dairy milk in it. Now, I think we can still improve the quality of plant-based milks so they become more and more like dairy milk. But the other reason is that I think there's just some people that are still going to want to get milk from animals. And that's where clean meat and cellular agriculture come in, which I'll talk about. But first, I'll talk a little bit about plant-based meat. So what we did at the Good Food Institute was dive into this plant-based meat area and look at all of the different technologies that are required to create a plant-based meat. I'm not going to talk about all of these. You'll be happy to hear. But I do want to talk about two main areas. Upstream, what we do to the crops to make them better for plant-based meat. And then downstream, how we modify those crops once we have them so that we can make better plant-based meats. So Bill Gates said about a year ago that only 8% of the world's plants have been studied for use in food. So imagine that, right? There's like all these plants in the world and only a very small percentage of them have actually been looked at to see whether they can be useful for food. And even with the crops we do use, none of them have been optimized for plant-based foods. Most of the foods that exist today, plant-based meat, use either soy or wheat. And those are really just byproducts of either the livestock feed industry or the biofuel industry. So what's starting to happen now is that we're exploring both existing crops and all of the other plants in the world to see which ones are best suited for plant-based meat. So we're starting to collect, for example, digital phenotyping data, genome sequencing data, other nutritional profiles, functionality information, and collecting all of that in a database so that we can look and see, okay, these plants are the best ones for making plant-based meat. Or these plants look pretty good, but they're missing some key qualities, and that's where precision breeding comes in. So we can either use traditional breeding methods or gene editing to introduce or remove certain qualities of crops to make them better suited for creating plant-based meats. And what that'll do is improve the functionality and performance of those crops and then drive down the cost at the same time. And once we have those crops, we then need to isolate and functionalize specific ingredients in those, right? So we might want to pull out the proteins from certain plants and then use them as ingredients in plant-based meats. And there's a lot of innovation happening around the methods to do that, so that we're not stripping away all of the key nutrients that are present in plants, that we're retaining those, but then pulling out the necessary ingredients that we need to produce plant-based meats. And then down at the bottom, this shows an example of a new technology that's being developed in the Netherlands to texturize plant proteins. So historically, this has been done with huge machines called twin screw extruders. They cost over $1 million, and they apply intense heat and pressure to plant material to make it texturized, so it's more like meat. But this is not very efficient. It requires huge amounts of energy, and it does a lot of bad things to the plant material as well. So scientists are now starting to look at much more environmentally friendly ways to texturize protein so that it feels and tastes like meat, but doesn't lose all of those nutritious elements of plants, and also isn't so unkind to the environment as well. One of the really exciting areas, at least for me, that's going on in plant-based meat research is really applying advanced biochemistry. And in some cases, really not that advanced, just applying biochemistry to the science of plant-based meat. On the left is a picture of soy-like hemoglobin, which is a key ingredient in the Impossible Burger, which is a new plant-based burger that was launched, I think, about a year ago or so. The scientists at Impossible Foods identified hemoglobin as one of the key components in meat, in a beef burger, that gives it the taste and color that consumers associate with that product. And so they found a version of heme in soy and then isolated that. They now produce it in yeast and add that as a component into this plant-based burger to give it a red look and a more meat-like taste. I've actually drank that liquid, and it's metallic in taste. It tastes kind of like blood. So pretty incredible stuff is happening as scientists start to dissect meat and understand all of the components that make up meat, and then find similar components in the plant kingdom to do the same thing. They're also looking at volatile compound analysis. So again, dissecting meat and understanding all of the aromas that come out when you cook meat, and then finding similar components in the plant kingdom that can be introduced into that product to give it the same sort of sizzle and smell when you cook a plant-based burger as you would a regular beef burger. And then third is around fat encapsulation. So we're starting to look at better ways to encapsulate plant fats so that they behave more like animal fats in food as well. So they don't, for example, just seep out when you start to cook your plant-based burger, that they're held inside and give the burger that sort of juicy texture that consumers want. So all of this work is working towards producing meat analogs that are essentially biomimics of the animal product. So closer and closer. Every year we get closer and closer to producing products from plants that are almost identical to products from meat. And I think in another 4 or 5 years we'll see products on the market that are completely plant-based, where consumers have a very hard time deciding whether it actually came from plants or it came from an animal. Pretty exciting stuff. So let's talk about something even more exciting, I think, and that's clean meat, or sometimes it's called in vitro meat or cultured meat. Thinking back to plant-based meat, so I think that many consumers will reduce their animal meat consumption as more and more of these great plant-based meat products come on the market. But there's often an underlying cultural or individual reason for many people wanting to continue eating meat from animals. And that's where clean meat comes in. This is actually a picture of duck à l'orange from Memphis Meats, a clean meat company. And it's produced through cells. It's not produced through, it doesn't come from a duck. And clean meat is the same as meat produced from animal agriculture. It has the same cell types, muscle, fat, and connective tissue. It looks and tastes the same, but arguably better. It doesn't require antibiotics. It doesn't require animal slaughter. And the risk of contamination from something like E. coli or another microorganism is almost non-existent. So how do we make clean meat? Well, the science is pretty well understood. It's adapted from the cell therapy industry. And very simply, you take a cell biopsy from an animal, and that's a teeny tiny biopsy. It can be done through pain-free methods. And that small biopsy is sufficient to produce massive amounts of clean meat. So you'd only really need to do that once and not very often after that. Those cells are then placed in a bioreactor or cultivator along with a nutrient broth called cell culture media. And that media provides all of the nutrients the cells need to grow and divide. The cells proliferate, and then once they reach a sufficient quantity, they're then taken and placed inside a different bioreactor or cultivator. And along with the cells, there'll be a change in the cell culture media, and also a scaffold will be introduced. And that scaffold would be either biodegradable or edible. And that scaffold provides structure to the cells so that they can grow in a three-dimensional shape. Those changes in conditions cause the cells to now differentiate into the muscle, fat, and connective tissue that makes up meat. And that whole process from the cell to the meat at the end takes about a month. So it's way faster than the time it takes to grow an animal for food. And once we're at commercial scale and we're using big bioreactors, we'll be able to produce in the region of 3,500 kilograms of clean meat from a single large bioreactor. So how do we get from the point where we are today, where there's about 20 or so companies working on clean meat in the lab, to where we can actually find it in grocery stores? So the main challenge facing clean meat today is cost. And there are three primary vectors to making clean meat cheaper. The first is optimizing those cells I spoke about so that they can produce the right combination of muscle, fat, and connective tissue more efficiently than is possible today. The second is replacing the very expensive pharmaceutical grade ingredients inside cell culture media with food grade components. And that process will drive down the cost of the cell culture media, which is a big barrier at the moment. It'll drive it down significantly. And then the third is scale. So as I mentioned, this clean meat isn't going to be produced in the lab. It's going to be produced in big, clean manufacturing facilities like this one, very similar to what's used today to manufacture pharmaceuticals or to even brew beer. And once scale goes up, efficiency will go up. The impact on human health and animal welfare will go down. And what's great as well is the overall impact on the environment will go down as well. So the studies that have been done thus far on clean meat predict that there's going to be an increase in the amount of energy usage compared to conventional animal agriculture. But I think, those analyses have looked at the facilities of today, and I think by the time this is commercially viable, the facilities are going to be using far more efficient and sustainable materials and processes and energy sources than the facilities of today. But even if energy usage goes up, the impact on global warming goes down, and that's primarily due to the reduction in gas emissions, so basically no more cow farts, right? Eutrophication goes down, and that's due to the elimination of animal waste that currently flows into all of our rivers and lakes as a result of factory farming. And then, even though these clean meat manufacturing facilities are going to be large, the amount of land that they require is going to be far, far less than what's currently required for animal agriculture. Those are soy plants growing there. Over 90% of the soy we grow today around the world is fed to livestock animals. And that land we free up can be used for carbon sequestration or clean energy production to offset any increases in energy usage from clean meat manufacturing. The clean meat industry is in a very exciting phase. It's really an exciting time to be part of it. And if you think back just a couple years to 2014, there was one company working on clean meat. By 2016, there were 3. This year, we have around about 20 companies focused on developing clean meat. And those are all powered by amazing scientists and engineers, and most of them are looking for new people to join their companies. And they're also powered by investors, such as these guys. Richard Branson and Bill Gates have invested in both clean meat and plant-based meat. And even meat companies like PHW in Europe and Tyson here in the US have invested in both plant-based meat and clean meat. So even meat companies see that this is where the future of food is going. And I really like this quote from Richard Branson. He says, in 30 years, all meat will either be clean or plant-based. And I believe him. I think that's where we're going. And I don't look at plant-based meat and clean meat as 2 distinct industries, 2 separate types of technology. I think what we'll see in the future, probably when the first clean meat products come to market, is a hybrid, a spectrum of different types of products, right? So if you look over on the left, you've got sort of very fully plant-based, whole food plant-based products like tofu. And then all the way on the right, you've got companies using cellular agriculture and synthetic biology to produce things like gelatin that are used in many, many products, but to creating a synthetic version of that, so we don't need animals for that. But then in the middle, you've got products like the Impossible Burger, right, which uses synthetic biology to produce that hemoglobin that I spoke about. But I expect that we'll see these products in the middle, these clean meat hybrid products, where you might have, for example, a plant-based burger, and then they add a little bit of clean fat to it to give it that missing sort of component of taste and texture that consumers are looking for. So I think this is, in the future, this is what we'll see as a spectrum of food that replaces meat from animals from factory farms. And to think about where we're going, I like to show this image. So that phone on the left, at least I'm old enough to remember using one of those. Probably most people in here aren't. We used to use that device to call our friends and families. We used to use another device to take pictures, another device to play games and find our way to places. And then a single device changed the way we do all of those things and more. And clean meat and plant-based meat have the potential to do the same thing to our food industry, to radically transform it, to provide food that's sustainable, inexpensive, and environmentally friendly for the world. And just like how it would now feel so strange to use that phone on the left to call someone, I'm convinced that in the not too distant future, the idea of growing crops, massive amounts of crops, to feed them to animals so that we can eat those animals will feel completely absurd. I think that markets and food technologies are going to save the world, change the world. Thanks.
Questions? Yes.
So about cultured meat, I wanted to ask, now from a cow we get an X amount of kilos of meat, and then if we can use cultured meat, how many kilograms will we have from the cow? So how will the conversion rate basically rise? You know what I mean? So now we get from the cow, I don't know, like 600 kilograms or something.
Yeah. So if you think back to that picture I had of the process where you had the cells on the left and the bioreactors in the middle. So one small biopsy of cells, that can be the starting population for hundreds or thousands of processes. So, and just from taking a small amount of that biopsy and then expanding those cells so that they, and adding the cell culture media so that they divide over and over again, and using that bioreactor system that I mentioned, you'll be able to, just from one single bioreactor process, you'll be able to create 3,500 kilograms of meat. So
From
if a cow is
one cell? Or
several cells.
Several
yeah.
cells.
So if a cow today provides 600 kilograms, you're talking about 6 times that. But then you can go back to those same biopsy again, right, and do the process over and over again. So it's exponentially more kilograms of meat from just a tiny population of cells from one animal. Yeah.
Okay, demanding ones for me with the cable, but we're gonna make it. Yes, that was first one.
So at the beginning, you were talking about replacing, for example, milk with plant-based drinks. So I got the point. I agree with it. But I'm just wondering, are those substitutes always a good quality? For example, I don't really buy soy milk or almond milk because when I am checking the ingredients, there are various kinds of thickeners or artificial colors. I mean, I highly doubt that the highest quality of rice, for example, or almonds are used to produce those kinds of drinks. And also, there is another point. Soy is no longer considered to be healthy, right? There is many people who don't digest soy properly. So what I'm saying is it always good to, I mean, I understand replacing dairy with some kind of substitutes, but maybe it would be better to, I don't know, educate people to, for example, drink less milk or eat meat seldom, and just because, you know, also the nutritious value of meat is completely different than plant-based burgers.
Yeah, thank you. There was a lot of questions in there. So, and please remind me if I forget one of them. So I think you're right about some of the plant-based milks. Some of the ones that have been on the market for a fair amount of time perhaps are not the best, right? They have a lot of additives and things, but I think what we're seeing is that the industry is changing, right? So there's some newer plant-based milks on the market that, for example, there's a brand called Ripple that uses pea protein to produce dairy and produce milk, and it has fewer ingredients, and I think tastes. I don't really like. I never really liked dairy milk, but I think this Ripple milk, what I've been told is that it tastes more like dairy milk. It's kind of thicker and creamier. So I think that you're right, but I think the industry is aware of that and is developing plant-based milks that are closer and closer to dairy milk. And it would be great if we could just tell everyone to eat less meat, animal meat, and drink less dairy. But people have been doing that for 20, 50 years, and it hasn't changed anything, really. So the younger generation is starting to realize that they should consume less, but overall, the amount of meat that is being produced and consumed is growing and growing. So telling people that they should eat less meat is good, but it doesn't seem to impact globally the amount of animals that are killed and the amount of meat that's eaten. So that's why we think we still need to create these alternative alternative products. So, I missed the last bit.
I'm just saying that, for example, soy is often GMO, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really healthy. I mean, we cannot really tell. There are studies, we still don't know. What I'm saying is that we cannot just tell people to replace meat with something else and tell them that it's the same nutritious value, because it's not.
Yeah, that's true. But I think...
And I wasn't really talking about, well, like telling people, like trying still to educate them, because I know that my friends, they live a really, they have a really healthy lifestyle. I mean, so they are pretty aware of what they are eating. And so I think that education works, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think that education works for some, and unfortunately not for everyone. So these meat analogs and plant-based milk products are not for you and your friends, right? Because you understand how you can eat maybe a whole foods plant-based diet and get all of the nutrients you need and be healthy. I myself am vegan, and I don't eat many of these products myself. But for the vast, I mean, around the world, there's about 3% of the population is vegan. If you look at younger generations, it's higher, but it's still a small percentage of the total population of the world. And so the reason we're developing these products, or the companies are, is to convert all those other people, right, that want to keep eating food that comes from animals. And I think, again, you're right about the nutritional content, but as these products, as these companies innovate more and more, they're actually creating products that are nutritionally, in the ways that they should be, nutritionally equivalent to, say, animal meat, but, for example, not having cholesterol or some of the bad attributes of meat. So I think these companies are conscious of this and are developing better products.
And I think there is additional aspect, or ethical aspect, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. Beyond just the health, I mean, just removing the need to kill animals for food is great, and the environmental benefits. So there's so many positives beyond just the health aspects that we just spoke about.
Okay, question, there was one here. If you can just come closer. Yeah, let's try.
Have you already solved the bovine serum problem?
Yeah. I was going to mention that, and then I figured someone would ask. So, fetal bovine serum is taken from. It's a byproduct of the cattle industry, and it's used to culture cells. And it's compared to these serum-free medium formulations that I'll speak about in a minute. It's much cheaper, so it's an easy way for scientists to culture cells and make them divide or make them differentiate into a tissue like meat. And so many of the clean meat companies today, because they're in the research phase, still in the lab, they're still using this fetal bovine serum because it's cheap and it generally works. But the pharmaceutical industry, they moved away from using fetal bovine serum about 15 years ago because it provides a lot of inconsistencies. So every batch you get is very different, and that caused the cells that they were working with to behave differently, and the drugs or vaccines that they were trying to create from those cells to not be the same every time. So they developed these so-called serum-free media formulations that have the same, or at least some of the proteins inside fetal bovine serum in them, but they're synthesized. They're just chemically synthesized. So there already exists today a solution for this, and this is called serum-free media, and I mentioned this very briefly in my presentation. The problem with it is that it's super expensive because it's designed for the pharmaceutical industry, and as you probably know, they can charge basically whatever they want for a drug, right? So they don't really care about these kind of costs. But obviously for something like clean meat, we need to take these serum-free media formulations, which now cost several $100s a liter, and we need to bring them down to a couple of dollars a liter. But we've done an analysis on this, and we know that it's possible. So it's just replacing those expensive ingredients with food-grade components. So kind of to come back to your original question, it sucks that these companies are using fetal bovine serum today because it harms animals in the process. But they're aware that that's not the long-term solution, and we're working with them to create these food-grade serum-free media formulations.
Okay. Yeah, one here, one there, one there. I see all of you, yes.
What is your position on GMO?
Well, that could be a whole other presentation. I think that as a scientist, I think that genetic modification or genetic engineering is a very powerful tool, and if used correctly, can do fantastic things. I think that some of the companies that have used genetic modification or genetic engineering have not done it in very ethical ways. And this has created problems for farmers and other issues as well with things like glyphosate being everywhere, which isn't good. But I think if it's done properly, I think that genetic engineering or genetic modification, even using the newer technologies like CRISPR to modify crops, for example, so that they produce better protein profiles to create plant-based meats, if it's done correctly, I don't see any issues with it. In general, it's a very safe technology. It's just how it's been deployed in certain examples has been pretty bad.
Plus, there are many tests before the food is going to the...
Oh, sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Can you just come? Yes, I would appreciate that.
So two brief ones. First one regarding the cultivating. As I understood, you said that we can extract painlessly the cells that we need from the sample, and then, as I understood, when we run out, we just repeat the procedure. Is that the process right now? Because I was wondering if we can just rely on the already extracted and cultivated cells to just ad infinitum, replicate them in.
Yeah.
And the second one is, can we create, by introducing fat, like different kinds of muscles from animals, or just like general beef muscle is cultivated and we just keep repeating that one? Because, different dishes for different parts of animal as it goes. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So there's a technique called immortalization that can be applied to cells so that they become immortal. And so I think that eventually the clean meat companies will utilize this technology, or they might, so that you can take that single biopsy of cells and then immortalize them so that you don't have to go back and keep taking biopsies from animals. So one of the projects we're working on right now is to create a cell bank of different cell lines from different farm animals. First, so scientists can study them more and understand how to more efficiently produce meat from them, but also to act as a repository so people don't have to use animals to get these cells repeatedly. And then your second question around sort of the different cuts of meat. Yeah, so this is, I think right now the clean meat companies are focused on just getting like a product out, and many of them are focused on more simple products like pâtés and ground meats and things like that that are more simple to produce. But eventually that's obviously what they want to be able to do, is to create every kind of meat that people eat today. So, and you're right that it's a certain combination of muscle, fat, and connective tissue and other ingredients that give certain cuts of meat or certain meats from certain animals different tastes and textures. And so I think all of that isn't yet understood, but I expect that eventually that's what we'll get to. And you can think beyond what's interesting, at least for me to think about, is thinking beyond the animals that are currently used to produce meat. So who's to say that, right, a chicken is the best animal for us to use for nutritious meat? Probably isn't, right? But once you've got this clean meat process in place, you can essentially create meat from any animal. You could even, if you wanted, like have a woolly mammoth burger, maybe, if you can get the cells from, from extinct animals. So we can think beyond, if we would like to, beyond these 4 animals that I showed in the beginning, and think about, like, if we really want to eat meat from animals, let's find animals that produce the most nutritious and healthy meat and take a biopsy from them, and then use those cells to create meat in the future. No one asked about cannibalism yet.
No? Question?
One thing is about that, you mentioned the cultured meat. I talked like 3 weeks ago. I talked with one startup 3 weeks ago, and they told me that they just puncture and take the specific type of muscle fiber from different parts, and they told me it was like $300K to make a burger for now. Something to add if someone wants to know the actual now the prices. But the second thing you mentioned, TVP, or texture vegetable protein. So it's mainly made from soy. I believe it's the only version. They're probably the bamboo one, but it's like a minimal amount of the others. But the soy comes with few downsides. That they are rich in phytoestrogens. So like something that is like estrogens, and your body thinks like you took the estrogen shots. And there are plenty of disadvantages of it, like premature growing, like the little kids are starting menstruating in like 10 years of age for now, or some kind of connection with breast cancer, or somehow the increase of breast size, even in males. So what do you think about that? Or there is option to just take off the soy at all and to replace it with something else?
Yeah, so the first question was about the cost of clean meat or cultured meat. And you're right that the first clean hamburger was developed by Mark Post in the Netherlands a few years ago. And I don't remember how much it cost, but it's a crazy amount. How much? Yeah, $250,000. And but as I spoke about in my presentation, this is the main challenge with clean meat right now. But if we optimize the cells and reduce the cost of the cell culture media and scale, we don't see any reason why the cost can't come down to be competitive with even the cheapest of meats. So there's no sort of missing technology that needs to be invented to make clean meat viable and competitive. It's really just getting more people to work on it, getting more funding to help those people work on it, and scaling everything up and reducing the cost of some of the inputs to clean meat production. So I'm very optimistic about the eventual cost of clean meat. You know, in the slide before this, I had a picture of the iPhone. I think the development costs for the iPhone were like over $1 billion, right? So that's how technologies start, right? They're very expensive in the beginning, but then the cost comes down as more people work on it and the scale goes up. So, and that's what we believe is going to happen with clean meat. Your second question was about TVP, or texturized vegetable protein. So, yeah, you're right that it comes from, most of it comes from soy, but really you can make that from any plant, any starting plant. So when in the middle of my presentation, when I spoke about where there are opportunities for innovation with plant-based meat, what we're starting to look at, or what scientists are starting to look at, is other crops that are better suited for plant-based meat. So is soy the right input for plant-based meat? Maybe, maybe not. But let's look at all the other ones and see which ones there might be in the plant kingdom that are better. A lot of people are now starting to use pea because it's far less allergenic than some of the other crops we use. It has a high protein content. It's easy to work with. It gives the right kind of texture profile that people are looking for with plant-based foods. So there's already a lot of innovation in looking at other plant sources. Another interesting one is like mung bean. So there's a company called Hampton Creek, which is now called Just, and they've just released a scrambled egg product, and it's made from mung bean. And I've not tasted it yet, but I'm told it tastes and feels in your mouth exactly like scrambled egg. Yeah, they make plant-based mayo. Yeah, and then I'm not a nutritionist, but a lot of those problems that you mentioned with soy, like the estrogen thing, have been debunked. So a lot of that isn't actually true. So I would spend some time, maybe go on to nutritionfacts.org and read about soy and the science behind some of those, or the lack of science behind some of those issues that the media has played up.
And do you know about any chemicals being added to make the nutrition, for example, or anything similar to what the regular meat has? How does it look like, this part?
You mean to make plant-based meats closer to animal meat from a nutritional perspective? I mean, I think in the U.S. and there's an obsession with protein at the moment. I think it's spreading around the world, which is unfortunate. But a lot of the U.S. plant-based meat companies have focused on protein. So if you look at like the Beyond Burger, which is I think launching in Europe pretty soon, on their label they've got like I don't know however many X grams of protein, right? Because it's as much as or more than a cow burger, and so they've tended to focus on like sort of macronutrients like that, but also show that it doesn't have the same bad fats that a cow burger has and doesn't have the cholesterol. So I think in general that's kind of where the focus has been, to kind of make it look and taste and feel the same as the animal product, and then make sure it has like massive amounts of protein, because that's what everyone in America seems to want at the moment in their food. But I do think that as we start to explore the use of plant-based meats in other regions in the world, we have a focus at the moment in GFI on India, keeping nutrition and even fortification in mind as we create these plant-based meats is going to be super important. Yeah.
Okay. One last question. Okay. Okay.
Maybe just a brief question. I'm just interested about other trends in different countries apart from US. Is there anything like really interesting coming up, or some? I saw Germany. I guess Netherlands as well are the markets for that. But maybe there's another country, or did you see any other trends coming up? Yeah.
It's really global. So if even clean meat, those 20 companies I mentioned, there's 3 in Israel. There's a company in Japan. There's several now starting in Europe. There's one starting in Australia. So and clean meat started in the Netherlands, right? Mark Post was, well, I'm not sure if it started there, but he was the first one to make an actual clean meat product that people ate. So it's really a global phenomenon. And I think on the plant-based meat side, it is as well. We see huge growth in Europe. In the UK, for example, where I'm from, there's massive growth in plant-based meat products. Tesco hired a plant-based meat chef to lead their and help develop their menu of plant-based meat products. And I read that there's a company in the Netherlands that launched a plant-based steak, and they launched it in the UK at Tesco, and it sold out almost immediately. So Europe, massive growth, but also in Asia as well, we're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of growth. And not a lot of growth yet in some of the developing regions, but it's an area of interest and focus for us, because we see a lot of promise introducing these products there, particularly as the sort of Western taste for lots of meat, animal meat, spreads around the world. If we can reach these developing countries first with better, more ethical, more nutritious alternatives, then we hope that they're likely just to eat those rather than massive amounts of animal meat.
Last one.
Lucky me. Thank you for your presentation. I could see you were a speaker also at the IMPACT.TECH conference today. So my question is a bit related to the previous one. Actually, what kind of arguments you see are working the best when you're talking to companies from food industry, meat industry? when you try to encourage them to switch their production more into the plant-based options?
Yeah, so what's been really amazing, so I've been at the Good Food Institute about 9 months now. We're a 2-year-old organization. And what I've seen and what my colleagues that have been there since the beginning have seen is quite the contrary. So companies like big meat companies and global food companies and smaller food companies are coming to us to ask us to educate them and help them on understanding this industry better and helping them move into this space. So we work with most of the large food companies to help their scientists understand, at least me and my team work with their scientists to help them better understand the science of what I just talked to you about, so that they can start to make more plant-based meat products and even start to move into the clean meat industry. So the only people that I think are somewhat reserved or nervous at the moment, or where we see the most questions, is the farming community, which I understand, right? I mean, they make their living from growing animals for food, and they're concerned about what they're going to do in the future. I don't think that, I think the jobs are just going to change, right? People are going to, instead of growing animals on farms, they can work in factories that produce clean meat or plant-based meat. So there's still going to be jobs that just hopefully won't be jobs that require people to grow and kill animals in massive amounts.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you very much.